The night I found the hidden pills crushed into my husband's evening soup was the night I understood everything. The tremors in his hands, the confusion in his eyes, the way he kept forgetting words he had known his whole life. My husband was not losing his mind to old age. Someone was stealing it from him, and the person responsible was sitting across the dinner table from me, smiling, asking if I wanted more bread. Let me go back to the beginning, because you need to understand how a retired nurse from a small town in Kentucky ended up married to one of the wealthiest men in Charleston, South Carolina. My name is Ruth Bellamy. I am 63 years old. I have hands that have held hundreds of dying patients, a voice that has comforted more strangers than I can count, and a heart that never learned when to quit. I spent 37 years working in hospitals. I started as a floor nurse and ended as head of the geriatric ward at a regional medical center outside Louisville. I loved my work. I was good at it. But the job does not love you back. When I retired, I had a modest pension, a small house with a leaky roof, and one person left in this world who mattered more than anything. My sister, Helen. Helen was 59. She had been my best friend since the day she was born. We grew up sharing everything. One pair of good shoes between us. One winter coat we traded depending on who had to walk farther to school. Our parents worked themselves into early graves, and Helen and I promised each other we would always look out for one another. So when Helen was diagnosed with a degenerative neurological condition that required a specialized treatment program costing more than I would earn in 10 lifetimes, I did not hesitate. I sold my house. I emptied my savings. I picked up shifts at a local clinic. It was not enough. Not even close. The treatment center in Boston was her only real chance. Without it, Helen would lose the ability to walk within a year. Within 2 years, she would need full-time care. Within 5, the doctors said gently, she would not recognize me anymore. I could not let that happen. That was when I met Robert Ashford. I was working a weekend shift at a private clinic when they brought him in for a routine checkup. Robert was 71. He was tall even when seated, with silver hair, and the kind of face that had clearly been handsome in his younger years. He owned a chain of luxury hotels across the southeast, commercial properties in 3 states, and a historic estate in Charleston that had been in his family for 4 generations. But that afternoon he just looked tired. Not sick tired, soul tired. We talked while I checked his blood pressure. He told me his wife had passed away 3 years ago. He told me his house felt too big. He told me his children visited, but only when they needed something. I listened the way I always listen. Not because I wanted anything from him, but because listening is what I do. A week later, he called the clinic and asked for me specifically. Not as a nurse. He wanted to talk. We had coffee at a quiet cafe, then dinner the following week, then long phone calls that lasted past midnight. Robert was intelligent, well-read, and deeply lonely. I was practical, plain-spoken, and deeply worried about my sister. After a month, Robert made me an offer. He said he needed a companion, someone real, someone who would not pretend. He said his children circled him like vultures, and his so-called friends only appeared when they wanted donations. He asked me to marry him. In return, Helen's entire treatment would be funded, every dollar, every session, for as long as she needed. I told him the truth. I said I cared about him, but I was not in love with him. Not yet. He smiled at that. Not yet is honest enough for me, he said. We married quietly at a courthouse in Charleston. No fanfare, no guests. Just 2 people making a promise that was more practical than romantic, but no less sincere. Robert kept his word immediately. Within a week, Helen was enrolled at the treatment center in Boston. Her first call from the facility, she was laughing. Ruth, she said. The doctors here actually listen. That sound, her laughter, was worth everything. But the moment I moved into the Ashford estate, I felt the temperature drop. Not the weather, the people. Robert had 2 children. His son, Gregory, was 47. He ran the hotel division of the family business, though from what I could tell, he mostly delegated everything to his staff while he played golf and attended fundraisers. Gregory had sharp features, an easy smile, and a way of looking at you that made you feel like he was calculating your net worth. His daughter, Pamela, was 44. She was polished and precise in everything, her clothes, her words, her expressions. She greeted me on my first day with a hug that lasted exactly 1 second. "Welcome to the family," she said. Her voice was warm. Her eyes were not. The first 2 weeks were uneventful. Robert and I settled into a quiet routine. Morning coffee on the veranda. Walks in the garden. He told me stories about building his business from the ground up. I told him about the patients I remembered most, the ones who taught me something about living even as they were dying. I started to genuinely enjoy his company. Something real was growing between us. Then the changes began. It started small. Robert forgot where he put his reading glasses. Then he could not remember the name of his favorite restaurant downtown. Then one morning he called me by his late wife's name. I noticed because noticing is what nurses do. When I asked his doctor about it, the doctor said it was likely age-related cognitive decline. Nothing alarming. But the pace was alarming. In my 37 years of nursing, I had watched hundreds of patients with cognitive decline. It does not happen this fast. Not like this. Robert had been sharp as a blade when I met him 2 months ago. Now he was struggling to finish sentences. One evening, I was clearing the dinner dishes. Robert had already gone to bed. Pamela had prepared his evening soup, as she had started doing every night. She called it a family recipe, bone broth with herbs, good for the mind, she said. Something nagged at me. That nurse instinct that never fully shuts off. I took the bowl to the kitchen sink, and instead of washing it, I looked closely at the residue. There were small granules at the bottom. Not herbs. Not spices. Something powdery. White. Partially dissolved. My hands went still. I scraped some of the residue into a small plastic bag and sealed it. I did not confront anyone. I did not say a word, because I had spent my career watching what happens when you raise an alarm without evidence. People deny. People destroy proof. People close ranks. Instead, the next morning, I drove 40 minutes to a private laboratory outside the city. I paid out of pocket for a rush analysis. 2 days later, the results came back. The substance was a benzodiazepine derivative, a sedative that in sustained doses causes confusion, memory loss, impaired motor function, and eventually permanent cognitive damage. Someone was drugging my husband, and they were doing it every single night in that homemade soup. My first instinct was rage. My second instinct, the one that had kept me alive through decades of hospital politics, was patience. I needed to be smart about this. I went back through the last 6 weeks in my mind. Pamela prepared the soup every evening. Gregory had recently convinced Robert to sign a limited power of attorney, just for business operations, he said, just to keep things running smoothly while Dad rests. The family doctor, Dr. Linden, had been the Ashford physician for 20 years. He was the one who dismissed my concerns about the rapid decline. And 3 weeks ago, Robert had mentioned wanting to restructure his will. He told me at breakfast one morning. He wanted to establish a charitable trust, fund scholarships for first-generation college students, reduce the direct inheritance significantly. When he said it, Gregory was standing in the doorway. Robert did not see him. I did, and the look on Gregory's face was something I will never forget. Cold, calculating, furious. That was the motive. Robert wanted to give away what his children considered theirs, so they decided to take his mind before he could change anything. I did not go to the police yet. I want to explain why, because I know some of you are already shouting at your screens. The Ashfords were powerful in Charleston. Gregory sat on the board of 2 local charities. Pamela's husband was a city councilman. Dr. Linden had treated the family for 2 decades. If I walked into a police station with a plastic bag of soup residue and accused these people, who would they believe? The retired nurse from Kentucky, who married a rich man she barely knew, or the upstanding Ashford children? I needed more, so I became very quiet and very watchful. Every evening, I sat with Robert while he ate, but I started a new routine. I would bring him a glass of warm milk before the soup arrived, telling Pamela I was trying to settle his stomach. The milk was heavy enough to make him drowsy. By the time Pamela's soup was served, Robert was usually too sleepy to finish it. I would quietly take the bowl away and pour most of it down the drain. Within a week, the changes were noticeable. Robert's confusion started to ease slightly. He remembered my name without hesitation. He completed full sentences. He even made a joke at breakfast about Gregory's golf handicap. Gregory and Pamela noticed too. I could see it in their glances at each other across the table. Quick. Worried. One afternoon, Pamela cornered me in the hallway. Dad seems different lately, she said, studying my face. He had a good week, I replied. She tilted her head. You have been spending a lot of time with him, I smiled. He is my husband. She did not smile back. Her eyes moved slowly across my face like she was reading a document. Be careful not to overwhelm him, she said softly. Too much stimulation can be harmful for someone in his condition. I nodded politely and walked away. But I understood the message. She was watching me too. That same week, I made a second trip to the laboratory. This time, I brought a sample of the dry herbs Pamela kept in a labeled jar in the kitchen, the ones she used for the soup. The lab confirmed it. The jar contained a blend of dried herbs mixed with the same benzodiazepine compound. Pamela was not just slipping pills into the soup. She had prepared a pre-mixed supply. This was not impulsive. This was systematic. I photographed everything: the jar, the label, the lab results, the prescription bottles in Dr. Linden's name in the medicine cabinet. I stored copies on my phone, on a USB drive I kept in my car, and in an email draft I sent to myself. Then I made the most important call. Not to the police, not yet. To Robert's personal attorney, a man named Franklin Pierce, who had handled the Ashford estate for over 15 years. I met Mr. Pierce at his office downtown. He listened without interrupting as I laid everything out. The lab results, the photographs, the timeline of Robert's rapid decline, the power of attorney Gregory had obtained, the will Robert wanted to change. When I finished, Mr. Pierce removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes. He was quiet for a long time. Mrs. Ashford, he said finally. Robert contacted me 6 weeks ago. He told me he was worried about his own memory. He asked me to prepare a contingency plan. What kind of plan? I asked. Mr. Pierce opened a drawer and pulled out a sealed document. Robert signed a protective order before his symptoms became severe. It states that if any evidence of medical interference is discovered, all powers of attorney granted to family members are immediately revoked. Legal authority transfers to an independent trustee until a full investigation is completed. My breath caught. He knew something was wrong, I whispered. Mr. Pierce nodded. He suspected. He could not prove it. But he trusted his instincts. And he told me one more thing. He looked at me directly. He said, if anything happens, trust Ruth. She is a nurse. She will see what others miss. I pressed my hand against my mouth. Tears burned my eyes. That quiet, tired man I had married out of practicality had seen me more clearly than anyone in my life. He knew what I was. He believed in what I could do. Mr. Pierce and I built the case carefully over the next 5 days. He contacted the district attorney's office privately. I continued my routine at the estate, smiling at Pamela, making small talk with Gregory, intercepting the soup every evening. Robert continued to improve slowly. His eyes grew clearer. His words grew steadier. One morning, he looked at me across the breakfast table and said, Ruth, something happened to me. Tell me the truth. I took his hand. I will, I said. Soon, Gregory walked in at that moment. Good morning, Father. How are you feeling? Robert looked at his son for a long time. Then he said something quiet. I am remembering things, Gregory. Things I had forgotten. The color left Gregory's face for just a moment. Then he recovered and smiled. That is wonderful, Dad. But behind that smile, I saw panic. Things moved quickly after that. 3 days later, I came home from an errand to find Pamela in the kitchen. She was not cooking. She was standing at the counter, holding the herb jar, the one I had sampled. She turned to me. This jar was full last week, she said calmly. I met her gaze. Was it? Her voice dropped low. I do not know what you think you are doing, Ruth, but you are a guest in this house. I corrected her gently. I am Robert's wife. She set the jar down slowly. Wives can be replaced. I leaned against the doorframe. So can heirs. For a moment, we simply looked at each other. Then she picked up the jar and walked away. That night, I could not sleep. Around midnight, I heard footsteps in the hallway outside our bedroom. I slipped out of bed and opened the door a crack. Gregory was standing at the end of the hallway, speaking quietly on his phone. I caught fragments. The lawyer is asking questions. We need to accelerate the timeline. She knows too much. Move it to this week. My blood went cold. I closed the door silently and called Mr. Pierce from the bathroom. He answered on the second ring. "It is time," I said. He agreed. The next morning, everything changed. Mr. Pierce arrived at the estate at 9 o'clock with 2 police detectives and a court order. Gregory was in the study. Pamela was in the garden. Robert was sitting with me on the veranda, drinking coffee. Real coffee, not soup. Mr. Pierce presented the court order to Gregory first. "Effective immediately, your power of attorney over Robert Ashford is revoked. All financial and medical decisions are transferred to an independent trustee pending investigation." Gregory stood up from his desk. "This is outrageous. You cannot do this." The detective spoke calmly. "Mr. Ashford, we also have a warrant to collect specific items from this property, including any herbal preparations, medication bottles, and kitchen supplies." Pamela appeared in the doorway. Her face was perfectly composed. "What is happening here?" The detective turned to her. "Ma'am, we have laboratory evidence indicating a controlled substance was found in food prepared for Mr. Robert Ashford. We need to ask you some questions." Pamela looked at me. Her composure cracked for just a second. "You did this," she said quietly. "No," I replied. "You did." The investigation moved swiftly. The lab results from the herb jar matched the substances found in Robert's blood tests. Dr. Linden, when confronted with the evidence, admitted that Gregory had pressured him to prescribe the sedative under a false diagnosis. The doctor claimed he did not know it was being used to drug Robert directly. The police did not believe him entirely, but he cooperated in exchange for a reduced charge. Pamela's breakdown came at the police station. She did not scream or cry. She sat very still and said, "He was going to give it all away. Everything our mother helped build, everything we were promised. He was going to hand it to strangers." Gregory was more defiant. He insisted everything was for Robert's own good. He claimed the medication was to help with anxiety. But the evidence was overwhelming. The lab results, the hidden jar, the phone records showing Gregory had contacted Dr. Linden repeatedly in the weeks before Robert's decline accelerated. My photographs, my documentation, my timeline. Gregory was charged with elder abuse, fraud, and conspiracy. Pamela was charged with poisoning and attempted grievous bodily harm. Dr. Linden faced charges of medical malpractice and criminal negligence. Robert's recovery took time. The sedative had done real damage, and some of the cognitive effects lingered for weeks. But slowly, steadily, he came back. The morning he walked into the kitchen and made his own coffee without help, I cried. I did not let him see it, but I cried. A month later, Robert finalized his new will with Mr. Pierce. He established the Ashford Foundation for Educational Access, funding scholarships for students across the Southeast. He set aside a fair provision for Gregory and Pamela, available to them only after they completed their legal consequences and a court-supervised rehabilitation program. He also set up a permanent trust for Helen's medical care. When I protested, he waved his hand. "Ruth, your sister's treatment is not a favor. It is the least this family's money can do for someone who actually deserves it." Helen's treatment continued without interruption. 6 months later, her doctors reported significant improvement. The degeneration had slowed dramatically. She called me from Boston one evening, her voice clear and strong. "Ruth, I walked to the cafeteria and back today without my cane." I laughed through my tears. "Show off," I said. Robert and I settled into something I had not expected. Real companionship. Maybe even love. He was still stubborn. I was still blunt. We argued about what to watch on television and whether sweet tea needed that much sugar. But every evening, he would reach for my hand on the porch and say, "Thank you for paying attention." I visited Gregory once, at the supervised facility where he was serving his sentence. He looked diminished, smaller than I remembered. "Why did you not just ask your father?" I said quietly. He told me he was willing to talk. He was willing to listen. Gregory stared at the table. I was afraid he would say no, afraid he would choose strangers over his own children. "Fear," I said gently. "Fear made you do something unforgivable." He looked up. "Can it ever be fixed?" I thought about that honestly. "Maybe," I said, "but not by you alone, and not by pretending it did not happen." Pamela sent a letter from her program several months later. She wrote that she had felt erased when Robert married me. She felt like her mother's memory was being replaced, like her place in the family was being taken. I understood the feeling even if I could never excuse what she did. I wrote back a short note. Your father did not replace anyone. He simply refused to stop living. And loving someone new does not erase someone old. It just means the heart still works. Life at the Ashford estate grew quiet in the best way. Robert spent his mornings planning foundation projects. I volunteered at a local clinic 2 days a week because retirement never suited me. Some evenings we sat on the veranda and watched the sun set over the live oaks. He would look at me and shake his head with a small smile. You know what saved me, Ruth? I would raise an eyebrow. My charming personality? He laughed. No. The fact that you did not panic. You did not shout. You did not accuse anyone until you had proof. You were patient. I shrugged. I am a nurse, Robert. Patience is the job. But he was right about one thing. If I had confronted Gregory and Pamela the moment I found those granules in the soup, they would have denied it. They would have destroyed the herb jar. They would have pressured Dr. Linden to cover his tracks. And Robert might have lost his mind permanently. Silence can be a weapon, but so can patience. So can paying attention. So can refusing to look away when something is wrong. I married a wealthy man I barely knew to save my sister's life. I expected nothing more than a transaction. What I found was a conspiracy, a family rotting from the inside out, and a quiet man who had already begun to suspect the truth, but could not fight it alone. I was never supposed to be the hero of this story. I was supposed to be the convenient wife who stayed quiet and collected her share. But they underestimated me. They saw a retired nurse from Kentucky. They did not see the woman who had spent 37 years reading the signs that others missed. The woman who knew that a patient's decline always has a cause. The woman who understood that the most dangerous lies are the ones wrapped in family love. If this story moved you, take a moment to like and share it. Tell me in the comments, what would you have done in my place? Would you have spoken up or stayed silent? Subscribe to Ruby's Revenge Story so you do not miss what comes next. Because sometimes the person they count on to stay quiet is the one who brings the whole truth into the light. And I was never just a wife. I was the woman who refused to let greed win.